I never imagined an ordinary afternoon could turn into hell right before my eyes. But when I pushed open the living room door and saw that scene, my heart stopped. Sarah, my wife, was leaning back, laughing brightly, her body pressed against Michael, my father. The dim glow from the table lamp cast arrogant shadows across their faces, as if trying to conceal the devastating truth underneath. The last time I saw Sarah smile like that was in our wedding album, a radiant grin free of any doubt. And Michael, the father I had admired my entire life, now bowed his head, smiling calmly, as if he were the victor. I stood frozen, ears ringing, heart feeling extinguished. It wasn't a casual hug between daughter and parent. It was a silent, deliberate embrace steeped in betrayal. Sarah's hand rested on my father's shoulder, her fingers caressing him as if they had secretly guided each other through countless seasons together. A hollow breath escaped my lips, powerless and pained, as though someone had carved directly into my heart. "How could this be?" I whispered to myself. Memories of our happy family flashed through my mind. Warm Sunday dinners, my daughter Sophie's joyful laughter, and my father's tender eyes whenever he reminisced about my mother. All of it had shattered in an instant. Sarah had been a driven student and Michael a decorated veteran with unwavering moral values. Yet here they were, weaving the most horrific drama of betrayal. Shock surged through me like an icy blade. I looked deep into Sarah's eyes. Where once I saw love, now glimmered a guilty passion. Beside her, Michael remained composed, as though it were all just a game and I was the only fool unaware of the script. In that moment, I realized my life had been torn apart. Karma doesn't rush, but it never misses. Those words echoed in my mind like a prophecy. Betrayal may hide for a time, but its consequences arrive like a freight train, with devastation that can scarcely be imagined. I drew a slow, steady breath, forcing myself to calm the storm in my chest. The story had barely begun, yet the fates of all three of us were already sealed. I'm David Parker, 35 years old, an architect living in suburban Chicago. My father, Michael Parker, now 62, used to be a Marine before becoming a successful businessman, a man I always believed embodied honor and loyalty. My wife, Sarah Parker, 32, was my college sweetheart. We met at a year-end company party when I was 26, and she worked in marketing for a tech startup. From day one, we were inseparable, laughing together all night, planning our future, and building a life I thought could weather any storm. But over the past year, Sarah had grown distant. She said it was the stress of her new role, director of marketing at a major corporation, and I understood. I was busy too, designing a new community center downtown, meetings, late-night client calls, and weekends at construction sites. It seemed her career was flourishing just as she'd always dreamed, and I was proud of her successes. After all, marriage wasn't just romance. It was partnership and growth. At least, that's what I believed. My father had retired from running his logistics company a few years ago and spent his days on hobbies, playing golf, volunteering at the Veterans Association, and mentoring young entrepreneurs. Since my mother passed away 8 years ago, he'd become both mentor and confidant. We shared Sunday dinners, talked about everything from market trends to family dramas, and I'd confide in him whenever something troubled me. Never did I imagine one of those troubles would be Sarah's fidelity. Looking back, there were subtle warning signs I chose to ignore. Late-night phone calls she'd hide whenever I entered the room. Weekend business trips she claimed were for conferences, yet she returned home tense, her eyes darting away when I asked about them. My father, meanwhile, had become more present in our daily life. He'd drop by unannounced, saying he missed family dinners, and I never questioned it. In fact, I encouraged their closeness. I thought it was healthy for my beloved father and amazing wife to bond. I recall one evening, about 2 months before everything unraveled, when my father sat in silence at the dinner table, poking at his steak as though on autopilot. He excused himself early, citing a headache. Sarah gave me a worried glance but said nothing. My stomach twisted, yet I brushed it off. My father had been withdrawn since Mom died, and Sarah was under immense pressure at work. In my mind, everything made sense. Our life seemed perfect. A cozy suburban home, promising careers, and our 2-year-old daughter, Sophie, bringing boundless joy. We were the portrait of the American dream, or so it appeared. Friends said we were the ideal couple, and I took pride in having built something so solid. But as the saying goes, the brightest smiles often hide the darkest secrets. And unbeknownst to me, darkness was creeping ever closer. It was only a matter of time before my world unraveled, thread by thread. As I sit here recounting these memories, I realize that everything I saw and believed was a carefully constructed facade. Beneath the laughter, family dinners, and weekend outings lay a betrayal so profound it threatened to destroy not only my marriage, but the very foundation of what I thought I knew about my father and my wife. But before we reach that moment of reckoning, let's rewind to those final weeks leading up to the revelation. Weeks filled with subtle clues, stolen glances, and that nagging suspicion I desperately tried to silence. Because in hindsight, karma doesn't rush, but it never misses. And those weeks were its silent ticking clock. It all began with an innocuous text message I accidentally saw one Sunday afternoon. I had gone down to the basement to retrieve some old family photo albums and noticed Sarah's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. The preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you." I froze, my mind racing. Sarah never used terms of endearment like that in texts, especially with her hectic schedule. I reached for the phone, swiped to open it, my heart pounding in my chest. The sender was saved as M. But the profile picture was unmistakable, my father's broad grin from his 60th birthday party. Part of me refused to believe it. Could it be a harmless joke? My father calling Sarah love? It made no sense. I tried rationalizing. Maybe he was just teasing her. Yet my gut tightened. My eyes scanned the rest of the conversation. Romantic kisses, emojis dripping with intimacy, references to our secret place, and promises to meet after Sophie went to bed. It was a digital confession that shattered me. My wife was having an affair with my own father. I felt sick to my stomach. My hands trembled as I snapped the phone shut and pressed my back against the wall. For a moment, I wanted to scream, run upstairs, confront them, demand answers, but fear and disbelief held me frozen. Betrayal has a way of rendering you speechless. The details flooded my mind. Late-night calls, Dad's odd moods, Sarah's vague weekend business trips. Everything clicked into place, like the final horrifying piece of a puzzle. I could almost hear the universe whisper, "The seeds you sow today will bloom tomorrow, whether you like it or not." My breath came in ragged gasps as I realized I needed proof. Real, indisputable proof. I returned the phone to its spot, my thoughts racing on how to proceed without alerting either of them. What would they say? How would they react? Confronting them on a hunch could cost me everything: my family, my reputation, my future. Yet my heart screamed that this was no mere suspicion. It was the truth demanding to be uncovered. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a shadow in my own home. I left for business meetings barely an hour after breakfast, lurking in the shadows of parking garages. I watched as Sarah's car pulled into a deserted strip mall at midnight. She stepped out in heels, sent a quick text to my father's number, and within minutes he pulled up in his old pickup. They met in a hidden corner of a closed furniture store's parking lot, embraced, then slipped inside. One night I followed them to a storage unit on the city's outskirts. Dad had used it to store his golf clubs, he claimed. I waited in my rain-soaked car as they disappeared inside. 50 minutes later, they emerged, her face flushed, his hand trailing along her waist. I snapped photos from a distance, each flash of the camera feeling like a dagger to my heart. Desperate to know the full extent of their betrayal, I hired a private investigator. I spent every penny I had saved for Sophie's college fund, but nothing mattered more than the truth. The investigator delivered hotel receipts under a fake name, showing both Sarah and Dad checking in separately, then meeting in the room at odd hours. There were videos, GPS logs, and 47 pages of recorded conversations. As I pored over the evidence late into the night, tears blurring the pages, my world crumbled. My father, the man I had always revered, was cheating with my wife, the woman I loved. And if that wasn't devastation enough, I discovered irrefutable proof. The paternity test results confirming that my daughter, Sophie, my sweet girl, was biologically theirs. My hands shook as I read the lab report again and again, willing myself to reject the facts. But the cold, scientific truth allowed no denials. The blood of my own child belonged to the two people who had betrayed me most. That night, I barely slept. The weight of the evidence pressed against me like a suffocating blanket. I imagined confronting them in that moment, screaming, collapsing in grief, demanding they dismantle their lives. But I realized something even more chilling. They were counting on me to explode, to make a scene, and destroy whatever remained of our family. They believed they could manipulate my love for them both into silence. That's when I knew I had to stay calm. I had to plan meticulously, ensuring that when karma finally struck, it would strike mercilessly. So, I methodically archived every piece of evidence, texts, emails, photos, videos, into a digital dossier that would serve as my sword and shield. Each file represented another moment of their deceit. With the affair exposed and paternity confirmed, a brutal question haunted me. What would you do if you found out the truth? I resolved to answer it on my own terms. I would not be a shattered victim. I would be the instrument of justice. And in that decision, the conflict transformed, from disbelief and rage into a steely determination. It was time to build my plan for revenge. In the weeks that followed, I became consumed by two objectives: securing my daughter's future and ensuring Sarah and my father faced the full consequences of their betrayal. I knew that confronting them head-on in a moment of raw emotion would be my undoing. Instead, I needed patience and precision. By day, I kept up the facade of normalcy, attending meetings with clients, playing catch with Sophie in the yard, and even joining my father for Sunday dinners, all while my heart burned beneath a veneer of steel. Behind the scenes, I was orchestrating every move. The first step was legal. Armed with the private investigator's findings, I consulted a renowned family law attorney known for dismantling high-profile cheaters and navigating complex custody battles. I needed an unshakable foundation: proof of infidelity, proof of paternity, and legal strategies to prevent Sarah and Dad from manipulating the system. My attorney explained that Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity could influence asset division and custody rulings, especially with the paternity revelation. I absorbed every detail. Karma doesn't rush, but it never misses, I reminded myself. Now, I would ensure it arrived like a freight train. While my attorney filed for divorce and custody petitions, I investigated Dad's financial dealings. Though he'd sold his logistics company years ago, he still held lucrative investments and funneled money through shell corporations. Rumor had it he was skirting taxes via offshore accounts. I hired another private investigator, one specializing in financial forensics, to audit his public filings and uncover hidden assets. The goal was twofold: ensure Sarah couldn't walk away with a massive payout and expose my father's potential financial crimes. If public shame alone wouldn't break their complicity, then legal and financial ruin would. At the same time, I protected Sophie. I opened a new savings account in her name, earmarked for her education, shielding whatever assets I could from any legal maneuvers by Sarah or my father. I arranged for my sister, Rachel, who lived in nearby Aurora, to care for Sophie after school, keeping her away from our escalating domestic storm. I refused to let my daughter become collateral damage in their web of lies. She deserved far better. On the home front, I installed discreet surveillance cameras in common areas, not to gather more proof of the affair, I already had plenty, but to catch Dad in any lies, recordings that could bolster my case in court if his testimony contradicted these recordings. The cameras captured his conversations during Sunday dinners, when he tried to act casual, joke with me, and dispel my suspicions. Each time he lied about his whereabouts or why Sarah was receiving 2 a.m. phone calls, I cataloged it as another piece of ammunition. I called it Operation Eclipse in my notes, the plan to fully expose their guilt and force them into the darkest corner of their own making. Still, I needed another layer of leverage. Sarah believed she could play the victim card, portraying herself as a wife trapped in an unhappy marriage who found solace in my father's arms. She had already spun this narrative to her friends, insisting I was neglectful and distant. So I reached out to Rachel, Sarah's closest confidant and an attorney, over coffee. I gently steered the conversation to reveal Sarah's shifting stories, late nights, vague explanations, and disappearing for days at a time. Rachel agreed to testify about Sarah's lies regarding her so-called work trips. Public humiliation, I knew, could be as devastating as financial ruin, and I intended to use it. All the while, I maintained the appearance of the loving husband and devoted son. Sarah kidded about us as though nothing was wrong, trying to lull me into thinking the texts were a misunderstanding, that Dad's late-night confessions were simply fatherly loneliness since losing my mother. Yet whenever she came close, I felt bile rise in my throat. And Dad, ever the calm patriarch, offered fatherly pats on the back, assuring me everything was fine, that families had their struggles. How ironic that they treated me like a fool. There was one more contingency in my back pocket, an arsenal they never anticipated. A former business partner of my father's had approached me long ago to warn of shady dealings within his logistics firm. I quietly met with that partner, who handed over internal emails revealing that Dad had knowingly sold defective parts to the military during his tenure. Federal investigators had looked into it then, but the case was quietly shelved. Together with my legal team, I revived those allegations, tipping off federal agents that new complaints had surfaced. If nothing else, Dad would face criminal charges, possibly decades behind bars, a humiliation far worse than any civil penalties in a divorce. Every night I lay awake mapping out the final strike, timing the exposure so Sarah and Dad would be utterly defenseless, humiliated in front of the entire world. Each morning, I hid my turmoil behind a smile for Sophie, reminding myself that her well-being was my guiding star. I had transformed from a shattered husband into a strategist, a reluctant puppeteer in a macabre play of betrayal and justice. The seeds you sow today will bloom tomorrow, whether you like it or not, I whispered to myself. And soon, it would be time to reap what they had sown. The day everything came to a head dawned like any other Sunday. Sophie rushed down the stairs, clutching her favorite teddy bear, singing a whimsical version of Twinkle, Twinkle. I forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and sent her upstairs to watch cartoons with Rachel. Meanwhile, Sarah and Dad were downstairs preparing the family brunch table. The irony was as bitter as burnt coffee. Family brunch built on a foundation of lies. I had asked Sarah and Dad to meet me at the courthouse for a family mediation session, supposedly to resolve an urgent civil matter Dad claimed couldn't wait. They exchanged puzzled glances but agreed, convinced I was still oblivious and assuming the text scandal was old news. As we climbed the marble steps of the Cook County Courthouse, I felt the weight of my orchestration, hidden cameras, the stack of evidence in my attorney's briefcase, and federal agents poised to move in on Dad. Every piece was locked into place. Inside the mediation room sat Judge Olivia Hayes, her calm, unassuming presence a stark contrast to my racing heartbeat. Dad, ever so composed, shuffled papers as though handling routine documents. Sarah's eyes flitted nervously around the room. I sat directly across from them, my face an unreadable mask, hands folded in deliberate stillness. I watched their anxious energy crackle as if daring them to break first. Judge Hayes asked each of us to state our concerns. Dad launched into a rehearsed speech about an investment dispute I supposedly had with him, fabricated to lure him here. He invoked family honor and legacy, the same facade he had used to defend his actions for years. I nodded politely, then spoke up. Your Honor, may we pause for a moment? My attorney handed me a USB drive. I plugged it into the laptop hooked to the large screen behind me and clicked play. On the screen appeared surveillance footage from my basement camera. Sarah and Dad, disheveled, breathless, their whispers soaked in intoxicated desire, pressing their bodies together in a heated embrace. Sarah's face drained of color, her mouth parting as though she wished to protest, but no words emerged. Dad's eyes widened, terror replacing his usual composure. The room fell silent. Judge Hayes leaned forward, voice steady yet edged with steel. What is this? I rose, voice measured. Your Honor, this, I said, letting the word hang like a guillotine blade, is the truth. The screen switched to display their text exchanges, midnight rendezvous, hotel confirmations, and messages calling each other my world, my everything, with cryptic references to our secret place. The mediator's jaw clenched. Dad's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table's edge. Sarah sank in her seat, tears streaming, mouth opening to speak, but only managing a strangled plea. It's not what it looks like. The recording spoke louder than any denial. Judge Hayes had the footage entered into the court's evidence database, and in an instant, Sarah's friends, co-workers, and Dad's business associates would learn the truth. But that was only the beginning. I handed the judge a stack of documents, private investigators' reports, paternity test results, and FBI referral letters regarding Dad's defective military contract scheme. Your Honor, I said quietly, there is more. The tension in the room became electric as the mediator skimmed the pages. A hush fell when a stern federal marshal walked in and delivered a subpoena to Dad for immediate appearance before a grand jury. His voice trembled as he stuttered, palms sweating. Judge Hayes and the marshals conferred briefly. My attorney had set it all in motion so that once the mediator's session concluded, federal agents would swoop in to investigate Dad's offshore accounts and fraudulent military contracts. In one fell swoop, I exposed Dad to criminal liability, possibly decades behind bars, a humiliation far worse than civil penalties in divorce court. Yet the final act of karma still awaited. As courtroom doors opened to let the news leak out, I had arranged for Rachel, Sarah's confidant, to receive a direct feed of the unfolding spectacle. Within minutes, Sarah's social media circle, her company's HR department, and the local gossip network would be alerted. Her reputation would plummet. She had always prided herself on sculpting a perfect public image. Now headlines would read, marketing director's marriage shattered by scandal, and businessman indicted for defrauding military. Dad's golfing buddies would whisper behind his back. Sarah's upscale lunches would be replaced by wary stares. Watching them realize they had nowhere left to hide filled me with a grim satisfaction I never thought I'd feel. They had cast me as the fool, and now I controlled the narrative. Their betrayal was no longer a private wound, but a spectacle for everyone to see. Sarah's tears turned to silent sobs as Dad was led away in handcuffs, protesting that I was destroying everyone. But when he looked at me, fury melted into despair. I saw the father I revered reduced to a disgraced criminal, shackled for actions he once defended as necessary business tactics. She thought she had won, but karma had other plans. After the hearing, I collected Sophie from Rachel's care. She had watched the news unfold on her tablet, too young to understand all the details, but old enough to sense that something was terribly wrong. I knelt before her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and whispered, "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart." In that moment, I realized that revenge could not erase the pain of betrayal, but it could restore something far more important: the truth. And as cameras flashed outside, capturing every tear on Sarah's face and every mortified glance from my father, I allowed myself to feel pain, yes, but also relief. The darkest chapter of my life was closing, and though the scars would remain, I had reclaimed my dignity and my daughter's future. In the weeks following that explosive court session, our world began to settle into a new reality, one built on honesty, as painful as it was. Sarah's marketing career collapsed within days. Her company issued a statement acknowledging her personal issues and promptly fired her. Newspapers ran relentless headlines. Local marketing director betrays husband and father-in-law, and businessman indicted for defrauding military. My father spent the next 3 weeks in custody, facing charges related to selling defective military parts, and he now faced the very real possibility of spending years behind bars. The once unshakable patriarch was reduced to a disgraced relic of deceit. For Sophie and me, life revolved around healing. Rachel helped us move into a modest condominium near her home so I could focus on being a present father. I enrolled Sophie in a new preschool, keeping her far from the gossip that swirled around our old neighborhood. Every morning I woke her with a bright smile, read her favorite storybooks, and prepared breakfast. Simple routines meant to reassure her that Daddy was here, and she would be okay. The seeds you sow today will bloom tomorrow, whether you like it or not, I reminded myself. This time, with hope rather than vengeance. My priority became giving Sophie the stability, love, and security she deserved. Emotionally, I spent hours in therapy unraveling the trauma of betrayal. The pain was something I could never truly forget, but with each session I learned how to process it, refuse to let it define me, and move forward. I realized that while karma had indeed delivered its blow, the true victory lay not in Sarah's downfall or Dad's incarceration. It was in reclaiming who I was beyond my roles as husband and son. I poured myself into my architecture practice, taking on new clients who admired my resilience and commitment to excellence. Gradually, I saw that rebuilding was possible. I wrote a letter to my father from prison. Reading it aloud to myself, the words trembled with a mixture of anger and longing. I forgive you for the man you once were, but I cannot forget who you became. I mailed it, never expecting a reply, yet hopeful that he might reflect on his actions. Sarah never responded to my messages, and I didn't push. Instead, I dedicated myself to being the best father I could be, teaching Sophie the values of trust, honesty, and perseverance. On her 6th birthday, I held her pink-glittered hand and made a promise. No matter what happened, I would always be there for her. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear echoes of my father's voice or picture Sarah stepping into the kitchen with that guilty smile. But now those memories no longer paralyze me. Instead, they remind me that even the strongest facades can crumble under the weight of truth. Karma doesn't rush, but it never misses, I whisper to myself, drawing strength from the journey I survived. It's a lesson I carry every day. Justice can be slow, but it is relentless. And though I lost a wife and a father, I gained clarity, resilience, and the unwavering love of my daughter. So what's the takeaway from this tale of ultimate betrayal and unstoppable justice? It's simple. The bonds we trust most can be the ones that break us. But from the shards, we can rebuild a life even stronger than before. To everyone watching this story unfold, ask yourselves, what would you do if you discovered the truth? Would you crumble or would you rise? Remember, she thought she had won, but karma had other plans. And you will too when you stand firmly in your truth and refuse to let betrayal define you. Thank you for joining me on this journey through pain, rage, and eventual redemption. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that trust is sacred and betrayal cuts to the bone, then we've done our part. And if you want to see more tales where justice finds its mark, hit that subscribe button. Because in the end, no one escapes justice, and we'll be here to witness every twist, every downfall, and every moment when karma finally strikes.